Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Carol, how's it going?
It's a little exhausting, but always a pleasure to speak with you, Matt.
This is the first week of the release of your new book, correct?
It is. You will own nothing out of the gate. I feel like we've been talking about it for a year now, but now it's birthed into the world, and people can have it in their hot little hands and actually have the opportunity, if you get the hard copy, to own something.
Yeah, this could be the last thing that we physically own, according to your book.
Well, it's not really according to the book or even to me. It's according to the World Economic Forum, and that's kind of where the cheeky title comes from. I'm sure when you saw this go around social media like I did, Matt, you see you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And you're like, oh, okay, somebody took this out of context, right? Because World Economic Forum is business and political elite. Like they couldn't possibly be predicting the end of private property. That's ridiculous. And then, of course, you go right onto their Twitter stream. You can do it today. You see the video, 8 predictions for the world in 2030. And that number one prediction is you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. So several things jump out to me. One, obviously being somebody who champions wealth creation opportunities for more than a quarter of a century. Number one thing I know is that wealth comes from ownership. You have to own assets that have the opportunity to retain value or appreciate in value. So to have a bunch of elites saying you're not going to have those wealth creation opportunities seems a little crazy. And then you'll notice the phrasing, you'll own nothing and be happy. You will, not we will. They're not including themselves in the prediction. So this is all about you and their prediction for what you're going to do. And then, oh, by the way, you'll be happy, trying to get you to buy into this as like some kind of amazing benefit for you, because if you buy in, then they don't have to force this upon you.
So it's actually selfless on their part by owning everything. They'll take all that burden, and I guess all that wealth will not make them happy, but we'll be happy because we don't have to worry about that stuff anymore.
Right. It'll be just from the goodness of their hearts. Let me unburden you with all of these assets that'll create generational wealth for you. We'll just take that out of your hand. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to call the plumber, even though the house is the biggest asset on household balance sheets. We'll make sure you don't have to think about those things so you can be happy, and we'll just run around very stressed out all the time.
The WEF, it strikes me as I think about everything I see out of them, as crazy as it is, and it gets crazier every year that they gather, but it kind of reminds me of the other kind of socialism before Marx came along and decided that socialist revolution had to be a violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie. There was this sort of scientism version of that where they just want, like, it's sort of the seeds of modern progressivism where, the elites, the really smart people, the people that went to the right universities, that came from the right families, they would sort of manage everything, not just financial systems, but everything from the top down. And so when I see the WEF saying stuff like that, they're basically saying we're a lot smarter than you are, so you really need to trust us with this, and we need to replace the market with this more rational system of allocating things. And I guess that includes eating bugs, I guess. I don't know. But I assume, by the way, the sequel, I'll give you this title if you want it. The sequel should...
Wait, let's just negotiate now. Royalty-free and perpetuity across media?
Yes, absolutely. The sequel to this book should be Let Them Eat Bugs, I think. But maybe your publisher won't like that. I don't know.
I like it. I like that. I think that's very catchy. It's interesting that you say that was kind of the previous incarnation, because when I think about Klaus Schwab, who runs the WEF, he's been at this since 1971. He is an engineer, so this kind of science guy by background, and he started that as the European Management Forum. And at the same time, he had put out a book that had his ideas in it, and his kind of main thesis is around this concept of stakeholder capitalism. And stakeholder is sort of a weasel word for, let me infringe on your property rights without having any risk. stands very apart from a shareholder, right? If you're a shareholder, you earn ownership in a company either by putting the fruits of your labor and you get some options or a stake in the business, or you invest your capital and you take a risk, and then that either pays off or it doesn't. The stakeholder is just the free rider. It's like the person in the group project who didn't do anything and then wants to come in and take over for it and say, no, I had a huge stake in this. Let me make sure that I put my imprint on the final product and get the credit for it. And what a persistent motherfucker this guy is, right? Since 1971, more than 50 years, that he's just been repackaging and rebranding and like trying to find a way to get it to stick. And finally, late in his Bond villain years, he's going, this is finally coming to fruition. This is fantastic. It's great. So, that's kind of a piece of it. The other piece is this idea that anybody's doing anything for the good of anyone else. And I share in the book a favorite vintage Twilight Zone episode. You may have seen it, but basically the aliens come down to Earth, and the people of Earth are like, what's going on here, aliens? And the aliens go, no, don't worry. We've been watching you. We noticed that you have all these problems. You have wars, you have famine. We've developed technology that addresses all of this, and we just want to help you out. We've done it. It's worked for us. We know better, and we're going to just make your lives better. And so the people of Earth are, they raise an eyebrow. They're like, I don't know about this. So they put the alien through the lie detector test, and he passes it with flying colors. And then they start to use the technology, and things seemingly start to get better. Well, while all this is going on, the alien has left a guidebook behind. And the CIA is like, let's just figure out what they're saying. So they crack the code, but just to the cover is all they can get. And it's to serve man. And they're like, well, that sounds noble. That's what he said. They're here to serve us and to help us out. And it all sounds great. So people start lining up to go on trips to the aliens' planet. And, they're all going there being happy. And one of the CIA guys is like boarding the spaceship, ready to go. And somebody else from the CIA has now cracked the rest of the code and runs out to the spaceship and says, to serve man, it's a cookbook. And that's what I think of anytime these people are like, I'm just in it for you. I'm like, to serve man is a cookbook.
Yeah. You start off your book with my pet issue, the thing I've been obsessed about ever since lockdown started. And you even mentioned the Canadian truckers, and we'll go there in a minute. But it strikes me that your book is basically an explanation of the financial tools, the way that they're debasing our currency, and the technology that they'll use to basically double down on everything that they beta tested during lockdowns. And I was saying early on, and I have no idea what you think about this, but when I first heard vaccine passports and the ideas that you had to show your papers in order to go into a restaurant, I'm like, that sounds like a Chinese social credit system to me. And all of this obsession about databases and being a good citizen by wearing your mask and getting vaccinated, they were just testing us to see if we would go along with that stuff. And now they're going to take these other aspects of social credit and really control everything, which is by which your point is, like, if you control somebody's wealth, you own them. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I think, my basic thesis is that we have global financial stakes shifting. And so these people who are wealthy and well-connected see changes happen. They are rhyming in history. These are things that have happened before. There are clear signposts in the global economy. And if you're somebody who's wealthy and well-connected and are doing well in the status quo, and you see a massive shift happening, like, are you going to just hope that it works out for you? Or are you proactively going to try to control it and shape it and at least, hope that you and your cronies come out on top? I don't think there sounds anything conspiratorial or, outside of common sense that would think you would do that. I would certainly do that if that was in my purview. And so, I don't know. I frankly don't know how much of this is that they planned this as a test run, or that they did these things and then went, oh, wow, that worked. I can't even believe it. What else could we do? But certainly the kinds of things that they're doing are meant to preserve their wealth and power. And if our ownership and freedoms have to go, by the wayside, so be it. And if you buy into that, if that can go, in a very peaceful manner, and they can legally rob and plunder you and take your freedoms without, having to make this a historical type of war, that's even better. So when you see things like what happened in COVID, that is an informal social credit system that is going after your social standing, trying to make you socially unacceptable, which impedes your ability to create other opportunities and to participate in society and whatnot. It goes after your job in many cases. Lots of people lost their jobs because they wouldn't take the vax, or they said something, spoke out about it on social media. And then in many cases, they took the assets. They shut down businesses and took those for the public good for some period of time. As you mentioned, the trucker convoy saw their assets frozen, their bank accounts frozen. So these were all based on some level of social credit that was, not quite just cancel culture, which we've also seen happen, but also, something that was kind of like state and then, kind of getting the buy-in. And the point that I make in You'll Own Nothing is that you have two sort of requirements in order for this to work. One is the technology. You need to have that technology to gather and analyze and store that data at scale, which obviously we have. But you also have to have the buy-in. And in China, that buy-in is forced and coerced, right? It's a communist system. But here, there's something else at play, and I call it ROE, return on ego. There's this sort of intangible benefit that is cast upon the people who are, part of right think. You're part of the good people. You can put an emoji in your bio. You can wear a fun T-shirt. Maybe you get an invite to the White House, and you could do a photo op. But you're considered that right and good part of society. And for that, people are willing to turn you into the state or, whomever else. And the social media companies are willing to collude with the government. And so, it doesn't have maybe the letter grade or the number grade assigned to it with a clear outline yet, but that's a stone's throw away from social credit. And given the fact that there were so many people willing to participate, it does not give anybody any pause to think that they can't do it again.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love Liberty and look cool. Yeah, like I was, as probably you were, I was so deeply disappointed in the sort of mindless tribalism that now seems to have taken hold, where your entire identity is defined by whether or not you have a vax emoji or a Ukraine flag in your bio. And I'm like, surely there's more to life than that. I'm hoping. I don't know.
It's very strange. We used to have people who, would go and they would practice a religion, or maybe they would be their fan of the sports team, and like that was their god, or at least their sport. And that has been completely usurped by sort of this weird team political kind of scenario where people don't have any sort of like borderline like principle or moral code. It's just like, this is what my team said. And we've seen that. I mean, how many times have you seen the man on the street interview where they'll go out and they'll say something that the other party said and say, do you agree with it? And then they go, no, this was the person who said it. And then there's this like look of sheer panic of, oh, what did I just agree to? So it's really about the messengers over the messages, which is a really, really disturbing trend and certainly not good for the trajectory of the country.
By the way, my spirit animal is not a sports team. It is Jerry Garcia, of course, and Jerry is a good spiritual leader for me because his entire philosophy is I don't want to tell you what to think or what to do. You got to figure that out for yourself. So at least not all of these tribal tendencies are destructive. I want to go back to something you touched on earlier because I think it's an important point. I'm not a smart grand conspiracy sort of Dr. Evil kind of person, but I am an Adam Smith conspiracy, which is the natural tendency of businessmen to try to figure out ways to game the system. And you know the control of the money, the purchasing power of money, is sort of a central player in that. And you could go back to Bretton Woods, or you could go back to 1913, the creation of the Fed. I go back all the way back to Alexander Hamilton taxing whiskey to finance the first national bank. I think that's when we lost America, and it's been downhill ever since. But this is just like the natural tendency of connected people with wealth and influence to kind of rig the system against the rest of us. And it's just this is not a new thing, right? The transfer of wealth by debasing the currency from working people with cash in their wallets to people that really know how to play the system, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just basic human nature. I mean, people want to accumulate power and wealth, and if you have power and wealth, you usually want to keep it, or for some reason, it's never enough. You need to keep score and keep that movement forward and gain more. And I go back even further in the book. I go all the way back to Rome and how, the Roman Empire was started with stable currency. Like having sound money was really a key principle that kept them alive for a long time and really strong for a long time until Nero came around. And he was the first one to call in the coins, and he would either melt them down and issue them in, a smaller kind of size and keep that extra silver or precious metal for himself and use that to finance the armies, or they would replace some of the content of the silver with something that was cheaper. Again, like the physical debasement of the currency where the idea came from, and they sort of imploded from the inside. And I traced that through the sort of different centers of the global financial universe, which before us was the British and before the British was the Dutch. And it's the same story. It's that history rhyming. It's not exactly the same story, but it's sounds pretty close. And we see these sort of same kinds of things where the people who are in power, they take on lots of debt, and then you get the infighting, and then the people who are poor are jealous of the people who are wealthy, and somebody's tipped the scales. And it really is the same kinds of things over and over again. The founding fathers definitely predicted this. They definitely saw this and tried to do what they could to come up with a system that would, keep this in check for as long as possible. And obviously the people who were managing that were sort of derelict in their duties to keep that strong and did what they could to game the system. And so, yeah, we've been on this sort of slow downward spiral for quite some time. But as 80 years into this center of the global financial universe after Bretton Woods, we're getting long in the tooth. We have lots of debt to GDP, 125% public debt to GDP. The IMF says that, it starts to get unwieldy somewhere in the 70 to 80% range. So, we're over that. The Treasury has said we're on an unsustainable fiscal path. The CBO said we're on an unsustainable fiscal path. I mean, this isn't hidden. And then on the global stage, we know that the Fed has not kept the currency stable. Forget about the domestic economy, but on the global stage either, as the manager of the global reserve currency, which has created all kinds of issues for countries around the world who are now getting rid of some of their reserves and looking for other trading currencies as well, because they don't want to be beholden to the US. And that final nail in the coffin was the Biden administration when Russia invaded Ukraine, saying we're going to freeze access to your reserves, which was just unheard of. And, I think when you look back in history, that's going to be like a key turning point that they're going to point to. Because who wants to give the United States the privilege of being the world's holder of the reserve currency if at any point in time the U.S. can weaponize that and go, sorry, you can't have access to it? I mean, it just makes no sense. So these are like very clear signposts, which is why you have Joe Biden making speeches to the Business Roundtable where he said there's going to be a new world order. You can go Google it. You can find it on the White House's website. it's not conspiratorial. Well, let's put it this way. It's not a conspiracy theory. It may be conspiratorial, it may be a coordinated effort, but it's on their part, not on the people who are reading into this.
Yeah. And going back to Klaus Schwab trying to rebrand an old idea like government control of the means of production is not a particularly new idea. And that ultimately, the idea that someone either owns or controls your economic future has been tried in many different flavors before, and it's a human disaster. It also it creates world instability, and it creates wars.
It's very true. And one of the things that I found, which I thought was interesting in the research, is that not every war brings about a new financial world order, but every new financial world order has been preceded by war that ends up being a catalyst, because obviously stakes change, different people come into power. It makes an easy sort of time and reason for there to be some sort of a financial reset of the system. So, that's something that you need to keep an eye out for. But usually before that happens, the cracks have already started to show, and there are periods of chaos, because it's not the outside force that really brings it about. That's sort of the final nail in the coffin. These big economic empires, they implode from within. And that's exactly what our, quote unquote leaders are doing with the United States.
Thank you for joining me today on Kibbe on Liberty, and for being part of our fiercely independent audience. Every week, my organization, Free the People, partners with blazetv to bring you this show. My guests bring smart perspectives on everything from current events to timeless philosophical debates. If you like what you hear, go to freethepeople.org/KOL and support Kibbe on Liberty so we can continue to produce these honest conversations with interesting people. Now, let's get back to it. So I see, and I've talked about this for, I guess, 15 years now, this clash of two competing paradigms. One, which you've been describing, and I very much see as well, the forces of centralization and how technology aids and abets that, and would allow something like a Chinese social credit system, which is a direct collusion of nominally private tech companies in China, financial institutions in China, and the government itself. But obviously the government's in charge, and you see all of those ominous signs that you're describing in the book. But then there's this other thing, the liberating aspects of technology and the radical democratization that comes from technology. And I mean, I know you get into this, but I assume that there's a white pill in here somewhere. There's a way to, if not stop this collusion, like to protect yourself from it.
I certainly hope so. And that's one of the things that really has stood out to me as somebody who's for free enterprise and small government. It's the fact that technology has gone from being this, force of good and democratization of opportunities to the point where you have these duopolies or oligopolies of just, a handful of really big players that are collecting rents on everything, particularly in areas that feel much more like infrastructure than private business to me. One of the examples I use in the book is the operating systems. Apple and Alphabet, those are your two choices. They cover 99+% of not just the US, but the planet. So, that's not free market capitalism. That's two choices, right? And I will say, Apple's been pretty good on privacy, right? So, but we're dependent on those same people being in charge, and that tenor could change at any point in time. So if those are your two choices, and Alphabet and Apple, get a call from the government, and they're like, I heard Carol and Matt, and they were saying mean things about us. We don't want them on our operating system. Then I can no longer participate in the modern economy. I mean, that's insane. So I think there is this sort of delicate balance there. And I also, I liken these tech companies to a de facto government. I mean, in many ways today, outside of the military, which, we can, not to say that they're building armies of robots anyway, but, they feel almost more powerful in certain areas than the government. I mean, they've got much stronger balance sheets. I know it's not an apples to apples comparison, but their market caps in many cases are larger than almost every country's GDP in the entire world. Many of them have more users than even the biggest countries in the world. So their size and scope is pretty staggering. And when you have the same players, kind of around the same types of infrastructure and collecting rents and making these decisions that have to do with things like our private property and our free speech, we don't have any bill of digital rights, so to speak, that protects those in this particular scenario. So I think that's something that we really do need to work out. And for these companies that don't have the competition and are sort of behaving as these platforms, these infrastructure platforms, I think that we need to have some rights codified. I'd love to see that come, organically from the people in the industry, just like agreeing like, hey, this is a good way to move through life. And I think with AI, it becomes even more important. In fact, funny aside, I had a friend who just sent me, just before we hopped on, I tweeted about this. Apparently, there's some group of people who are going around and doing AI biographies on people. So there's these crazy Carol Roth AI biographies that have come out on Amazon where they're stealing photos, and they're the definitive biography of like the 5 things about me on the internet that they were able to scrape. And you can just look at it and see like this came right out of ChatGPT. So the idea that like our names and our likenesses should be protected and that AI should be able to train on things that are proprietary to us and our intellectual property, I think that, this is nascent, but we got to get that sorted out. So industry first. And if we can't do that, then I think we're going to have to, start with some sort of a government thing and try and mold that and get it right over time.
It's interesting. I struggle with this as well, but at the beginning of your description, you pointed out that it was, in fact, government agencies. And, according to the Twitter files, both FBI and the CIA were very much dictating whether or not Matt and Carol could have a conversation about certain subjects. And it could be any subject that they would decide was off the table. So in that sense, it really felt like all of the big tech companies that were having these weekly conference calls were very much junior partners in that relationship, but the quid pro quo is probably some emerging content moderation legislation that would make it very difficult for competitors to get into the market. So I always look for that, like when I see a really, yeah, I always look at that, and I wonder like. If the government has captured big tech, how can we hope that the government writes legislation that rationally dismantles that power?
I mean, I agree. I think it's how do we say these are our rights, just like they are in the Bill of Rights, and just apply them to the digital sphere? I don't think we want a lot of rewriting. I think we just want a reaffirmation, because nobody granted us these rights. They were, they're inalienable rights. And so I feel like they should be so regardless of whose sphere we're in. But again, that's why, I mean, maybe you and I and some other people need to get together and start this, because, if it does come from government, like you said, it's probably going to end up stinking at first and require lots of lots of changes and shift.
Yeah. And they'll be happy to fix it once they break it. So. And that's an endless cycle. So like I always hang my hat on something that I only have appreciation for as a kind of a Hayekian economist, and that's the emergence of blockchain and crypto. And of course, you know the famous Hayek interview where he sort of anticipates crypto as a workaround to the corruption of central bank currency. But I see our government going after blockchain, going after crypto, and trying to replace it with a central bank digital currency. And it tells me that must be their Achilles heel. This is how the market or innovation or people solving problems would deal with all of this massive centralization that you're describing.
Yeah, clearly, it is a threat to their power, right? If you control the money, you control the people, you control their economic opportunities. It's the greatest source of power. It's the biggest industry, financial services in the United States. There's a lot riding on them staying on top of that. So the idea that people would want to freely trade with themselves in a currency that can't be manipulated by them is obviously super offensive. So given the fact that there are people in the know about this and understanding that decentralization is, one of the key selling points, what the government always likes to do, and the Fed jumps on this as well as government adjacent, is they try to conflate issues. So they'll say, well, I know you guys are interested in this crypto stuff, but that has a lot of risk to it. We're really awesome at currency. We've done a fantastic job of keeping it stable for so long, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So we're going to make sure you have a safe digital currency, with people not realizing that's entirely centralized and flies in the face of everything that a Bitcoin is trying to do. And what I've imagined is that there's probably several carrots that will be used to get people who aren't particularly financially literate into this system. One could be universal basic income. Hey, we'll offer you, a long-term ongoing bribe, but it has to be in digital currency. The second might be just the, exchange, bait and switch exchange with people who don't understand debasement of currency. The same thing that happened, frankly, when we got the stimulus checks. Right. I mean, I think you and I talked about this before. They suggest these stimulus checks and you and I are going, no, don't do it. It's a trick. And most people are like, no, I want my like $1,200, Donnie dollars or Biden bucks or whatever. And we all know that is going to cost them $7,000 to $10,000 a year for the rest of their lives, but they don't know that. So imagine the government coming out and being like, hey, we're going to give you 100 digital dollars for every dollar you give us, limited time offer. And people are like, oh, I'm going to be a millionaire. And then that harkens back to that 70s skit with Dan Aykroyd as Jimmy Carter, where he's like, wouldn't you like to drive a $500,000 car and wear a $75,000 suit? Because, people don't understand the difference between the nominal value of money and then the purchasing power. So, I see that as a possibility. Or the third thing that could happen, is with this inflation fight, is if inflation persists long term, which I think is very likely to, that they say, well, if we go to this digital dollar, we can control inflation. And, instead of having the tools that they have of shifting interest rates, what they'll do is, when they want to disrupt demand, they'll just turn off access to spending. Like you just won't be able to spend. So I think the average person doesn't understand this, and that's going to give, the sort of buy-in to the central bank digital currency, which then will have, complete transparency and control over everything you do. And, on a formalized or informalized social credit basis, be able to, dictate how you work economically in society and your opportunities, which is just absolutely frightening.
If you've made it this far into the show, it means I must be doing something right. Kibbe on Liberty is just one of the amazing products we create at Free the People. We tell emotionally compelling stories and produce educational videos for the liberty curious. Our award-winning documentaries personalize all things liberty, independence, creativity, hard work, integrity, and perseverance. After the show, check out our work at freethepeople.org. And if you like what you see, donate to support what we do. That's freethepeople.org. Now back to the show. Yeah, like that is the final nail in the coffin in a lot of ways, because that is this dystopian future where you will own nothing and like it. And this goes full circle back to the Canadian truckers. If people want to understand what it's like if the government can just switch off your bank account or redefine the value of your bank account and then to decide that you don't have access to it anymore because you voted for the wrong guy in the presidential election, or you criticized the FBI, their censorship policies on social media. This is it's actually worse than the Chinese credit system.
or at least equal to it. And it's interesting because I think if you and I had had this conversation a decade ago, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know from my mouth, I probably would have been like, well, of course that could happen, but it's not probably that likely to happen. And then we go through COVID and we see the compliance of the populace to this, and you see what they were willing, what boundaries they were willing to push, and what freedoms they were willing to crush, and what constitutional rights they were willing to just throw by the wayside. And now it's like, yeah, no, that easily could happen. So I don't know, has your mind shifted on that, Matt?
Yeah. Well, I'm more worried about the downside, and I still try to be hopeful, but in the last 3 years, completely shaken my confidence. I've always sort of leaned on the wisdom of crowds and the ability of people to figure things out, even in the most of authoritarian regimes. But I don't know. Like I have this half-baked theory that part of the problem with Americans right now is that we in many measures we are doing quite well, and we don't worry about the things that our grandfathers worried about, like how am I going to feed my children, and am I going to have a job and all that stuff. So it's so we're fat and happy, and the government comes along and says, stay home, be safe, here's a stimmy check. They're just like the hamster up at the pellet machine. Say, yeah, give me one of those.
Right. We'll deliver you the bugs by drone. You don't have to do anything. We got you covered. You'll be happy, and you won't own anything. And I think that is a real consideration that probably wasn't the case. But I think you're right. First of all, we've never been through a period where we haven't been really prosperous. We've seen it degrade somewhat, but this is like just an anomaly in history. There's never been a period like this. And so I think it's easy to have this level of, or at least this feeling of invincibility, that it's always going to be like this. I mean, how could America not be at the center of the financial universe? Who else is there? And then I think, well, if I was in Britain at the time when they were at the center of the financial universe, my guess is those people probably felt the same. And the other piece you said about being fat and happy, it reminds me of that, good times or bad times create strong men meme, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, you kind of go through the cycle, and then the good times create the weak men create the hard times. And I kind of feel like that's where we are in the meme, is that it's been so good. People are so delusional. They have no idea where things come from, and people don't even understand that money is a proxy for productivity. I mean, it's just, we're just so far removed from reality that now those hard times, they're coming.
Yeah. This is my dilemma as someone that really wants to defend the rules that allow for this kind of freedom and prosperity that I think many Americans now take for granted. And if you look at world history, as you have touched on a number of times, there's this tragic cycle of boom and bust, and the bust can be just brutal and could devolve into wildly violent regimes and mass starvation and all the things that we saw in the Cultural Revolution and Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. I would rather skip the bust and try to wake people up, or at least those people who are awake. And I want to look at the subtitle of your book, because all you're doing is bumming me out right now. But you promised that you're going to tell us how to fight back. How do we fight back?
So the little Easter egg for you. So the final chapter is chapter 11, and that was my inside dad joke to myself, because chapter 11 usually means bankruptcy and giving up of your possessions, and I turned that on its head. Chapter 11 is all about shifting your behaviors so that you have the opportunity to fight back. And let's be realistic, because this is very overwhelming. Like you, I don't know that we're going to be able to stop historical cycles or human nature, but we could prolong it. We could make it, push it that timeline way out. We could get things into a little bit more balance. So I think that's one lens. And at a minimum, even if we can't do that, we can set ourselves up to be strong within the chaos and to at least not, completely panic. And I sort of liken it to, if your house is burning down, it's a really bad time to plan an escape route and to buy insurance. You want to be buying that insurance and making those plans so that when that happens, you're not like deer in headlights, like, oh my God, what's happening here? You've thought this through and you've taken some precautions. And so people have said to me, this sounds prepperish. And not that there's anything wrong with being a prepper, but that's a lifestyle. Like if you're a prepper, like you're living that every day, like you're waiting for it to come tomorrow, and this is how you're moving through life. I feel like just being prepared is having that plan so that you don't have to have that burden every day, and you can try to enjoy your life as you should, but know if something goes sideways that you've at least thought through it and you're emotionally prepared and otherwise prepared to deal with. So a lot of the feedback in the final section is just good financial advice that I would give to you anyway. But I think it takes on a new lens when you put it through a scenario like the one that we talk about in the 10 chapters plus the introduction proceeding. So since we talked about CBDC, like that's a good place to start. Like, what if there was a CBDC and they just turned off access to your bank account? Like how, even if that like gets rectified or that's just a period of time, like what do you do in the interim? Like what do you have around you that you can barter with and trade with? Like have you gotten any precious metals in small denominations? Or if you're a crypto person, have you thought about that? Have you talked to people in your community? Like, do you know who the doctor is who's going to be willing to trade and the person who has the chickens? And like, have you just, kind of been, okay, I feel like we've got our bases covered here and we can at least make it through some period of time. Maybe I've, stockpiled some medicine, like whatever those things are that you need to get through periods of time and figure this all out. I think that's a good thing to do. Another thing that we haven't touched upon yet is just the idea that we have a lot of wealth and the government probably wants to come after that. There's almost $85 trillion that's set to turn over voluntarily via inheritance in the next 23 years. And if you look at the language that has seeped into the Biden administration, I don't think this is a coincidence. When you have Janet Yellen talking about taxing unrealized capital gains, which is a weasel phrase for we're going to just look at your wealth and we're going to take a piece of it, or bumping up inheritance taxes. It's not because they want to go after the billionaires. They want you to concede that property rights don't exist and that you're fine with it for billionaires, because once you're fine with it for billionaires, you're fine with it for yourself. And so just imagine, to put it like in layperson's terms, like your parents bought a house for $100,000 in 1970. And then all of a sudden today, Janet Yellen looks on Zillow, or she just, goes like this because that's what she always does. And she says, okay, it's worth $2 million today. And now your parents owe taxes on $1.9 million. Like, where are they getting that money from? They probably have to sell the house probably to somebody on Wall Street in order to get the money to pay for that. That's the level of things we're talking about, as well as the inheritances, this almost $85 trillion, which would go a long way to, to their unrealized or to their unfunded liabilities and our national debt, and continue to expand their power. So I brought in an estate planning attorney to give some advice in the chapter to talk to people about, doing some estate planning, even if you're just the average American, and looking at things like trusts that we can't guarantee that they're going to be grandfathered in. But like one of my overarching themes is like, do what the elite are doing and stop listening to what they're saying. And they're buying homes, they're buying land, they're putting these trusts together. So, they're going to find a way to get a loophole for themselves. So do those things, emulate those things to give yourself the best chance of that not being sort of taken away from you when this all comes to fruition, and if it all comes to fruition. And that's the rub. We don't know duration. We know it's the end of the cycle. And looking back at history, it's like, oh yeah, it's clear to see, but you're in the middle of it. So is it 12 months? Is it 12 years? Is it 50 years? I don't know. But hopefully we can push it out as long as possible.
Yeah, I like your attitude about prepping, because I think it's sort of a miserable life to be expecting the world to end every day. Because I want to live my life, but I don't want to be naive about it, because there are there are the Klaus Schwabs of the world that want to take all my stuff.
For themselves, because
Yeah.
you'll own nothing, but he's not included in that you. He's part of the we, part of the elite. And it's funny, I listened to, one of the John Kerry clips, and just like one of the most insufferable people out there. And, his like, oh, well, I don't own a private jet. It's part of my wife's LLC, so that doesn't count, kind of thing. And he like basically said like, oh, well, we're the smart elite people and we have to go figure this out. So, of course I'm going to need to get there. They just completely see the us and them factor. And that's a really frightening scenario when we're trying to create opportunities for everyone. But you can see that's not what the people in charge, it's not what they want, because incentives drive outcomes, and the incentives aren't removing barriers to get more people, more wealth. They're creating barriers to put more people on the government dole to expand their power. So this is just, again, very basic human nature kind of stuff. Very hard to argue that's a conspiracy.
Yeah. Okay. You will own nothing. Carol Roth. I see your book and you everywhere this week, so I'm wishing you well in the sales sweepstakes. I'm sure that system's rigged too, but we got to do what we can do. Congratulations, and thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much. The elite may want people to own nothing. I want people to own everything. So I hope that they will get the book, empower themselves with the knowledge, share it with others, because that's what it's all about, and ultimately fight back.
Okay, where do we find you on? I know you're all over Twitter. Where do we find you?
So, I mean, yes, this is hilarious. Like, I'm on Twitter at Carol J.S. Roth, but like 10 people see me because I'm being throttled there. And I have a website at carolroth.com that who knows when they're going to take that down. But if you buy the hard copy of the book, I'm pretty sure they can't change the words. So at least we're ahead with that.
So raise chickens and buy paper books. That's your advice.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.